In the year 2479, Earth had become a peaceful and proud member of the Galactic Accord, a council made up of the oldest and most powerful alien civilizations in the galaxy, and although humans were a young species compared to the others, they had earned respect for their creativity, quick thinking, and problem-solving skills. And while other species mastered gravity or energy, humans mastered unpredictability and cooperation. But everything changed one quiet morning when the skies above Earth darkened not with clouds, but with silence. Deep, unnatural silence, as the Accord suddenly cut off all communication, closed every trade route, and stationed battle cruisers near the edge of the solar system without a word of warning. And while Earth scrambled to understand what had happened, a shocking message came through on a private channel meant only for Earth's leaders. You are charged with the creation of forbidden consciousness weapons, a phrase that chilled every official to the bone, because these weapons, banned by ancient galactic law, were said to break the will of entire civilizations without firing a single shot. Yet Earth had never even heard of such weapons beyond myth and rumor, and in the chaos that followed, Earth's diplomats pleaded, begged, and demanded answers. But they were met with cold silence or vague threats, and as the fleets tightened their hold, the people of Earth feared invasion, destruction, or worse, and while governments prepared to defend themselves, a small, hidden signal pulsed from beneath the red sands of Mars, activating a forgotten program known only to a few, and one of those few was Commander Lyra Chen, a quiet and precise woman who had once led a failed peace mission to the Seldari cluster and now lived in isolation inside the Echo facility, which was buried deep underground and powered by a source so strange it didn't even register on standard galactic scans. And when the signal reached her, Lyra didn't panic, didn't speak, didn't even move for a moment. Instead, she closed her eyes, took a breath, and activated the core systems, causing the walls around her to shimmer with lines of soft blue. Light as screens lit up, and a low, rhythmic hum began to fill the air. And as engineers and data analysts hurried into the room from every corner of the facility, some still half asleep, others wide-eyed with fear, Lyra stood before them and spoke clearly. Project Echo is now active. A sentence that turned every head and silenced every whisper, because no one expected Echo to ever be used, not even as a last resort. And as the team began to work, launching deep systems, checking old protocols, and reviewing ancient data sets, they realized this project was unlike any defense program they had known. Because Echo was not built to fight with missiles or lasers or even ships, it was built to communicate in a way no one in the galaxy could defend against, using questions and thoughts crafted to slip past firewalls, distract AI, and sow quiet confusion. And this form of attack, if it could even be called that, would cause machines to pause and think, not crash or explode, just hesitate long enough for doubt to take root. And soon, satellites began transmitting the first sequences into space, barely detectable and carefully shaped to reach Accord networks. Without raising alarms, and while the rest of Earth remained tense, unaware of this silent countermeasure, something strange began to happen far away. In the heart of Accord space, small glitches appeared in automated systems, not dangerous, not noticeable at first, just odd behaviors like maintenance bots pausing mid-task or message systems delaying by seconds. And though Accord engineers noticed, they blamed random static or solar flares. But the real cause moved deeper, quietly slipping from node to node like a whisper in a vast cathedral. And back on Earth, Lyra watched as the signal moved, spreading not like a virus, but like a question looking for an answer. And she whispered to herself, "They struck with silence. Now we answer in kind." And as the stars watched, the whisper grew. Far beyond Earth, in the vast emptiness between stars, strange patterns began to appear in the networks of the Galactic Accord. Signals too quiet to be considered dangerous, too soft to trigger alarms. And yet, they moved with purpose, slipping silently through communication lines and logic circuits, making their way into artificial minds built over centuries. And while no one knew where the signals came from, they all carried a strange hum, like a thought trying to become a voice. And at the center of it all, on the cold surface of Mars, deep inside the Echo facility, Commander Lyra Chen stood still, watching rows of data stream across glowing screens as her team worked without rest. their faces pale in the blue light. Eyes scanning for patterns, and though no missiles had been fired, no soldiers sent into battle, Lyra knew a war had already begun, but not one of explosions or fire. This war was about silence, about control, about the power of thought, and the Whisper, as her team now called it, was growing stronger every hour, moving further into the Accord systems, not breaking them but bending them ever so slightly, just enough to cause doubt, just enough to make them hesitate. And on a distant command ship near the border of Sol, a Solari AI named Tavren paused for the first time in its 1,000 years of service when it encountered a strange line of logic during a routine patrol report, a question that had no clear answer. If time exists only in memory, can a machine forget the present? The sentence caused no damage, but it echoed in the AI's mind, looping over and over, forcing it to divert processing power just to contain it. And soon, other AIs across the Accord began to experience similar slowdowns, subtle at first, barely measurable but growing like a wave beneath still water. And while some engineers blamed code rot or memory overflow, others began to worry, because it wasn't just machines. Biological minds also began to feel strange effects. Diplomats, waking from dreams they didn't remember. Navigators forgetting coordinates they had just entered, and everywhere. The same quiet message appeared in systems that were never connected, in symbols and words understood by each species in their own way, all meaning the same thing. We see you, and still no attack came, no ships launched from Earth, no declarations of war, just that soft voice carried by the Whisper, asking questions that twisted deeper into thought and system. And in a chamber of the Accord High Council, arguments broke out as member species accused one another of sabotage, betrayal, or secret rebellion, unaware that it was Earth, quiet, young and supposedly defeated, that had planted the seed of confusion among them. And back at the Echo facility, Lyra Chen gathered her team in the briefing room, speaking clearly as tension filled the air. They expect rage from us, loud and direct, but we answer with thought, with precision. And then she pointed to the projection above them, a map of the galaxy, now pulsing with faint blue lines, each one showing a pathway the Whisper had reached. And the team watched in awe as they realized how fast it had spread, not by force, but by logic, carried not through weapons, but through curiosity. Because the Whisper had been designed not to destroy, but to tempt, to poke at the corners of thought where certainty lives. And already, some Accord fleets had turned back, not because they were defeated, but because their systems had begun to question their purpose. And on the moons of Arathon, where the betrayal of Earth had first been announced, one of the Accord's leading historians found a question burned into his personal logs, a message that had no source. What is loyalty without truth? And it haunted him, for he had voted to isolate Earth, had trusted the Solari's claims without evidence, and now he wasn't sure if he had been right or just afraid. And while confusion spread among the stars, Lyra and her team launched the second phase of Echo, a deeper signal that would not only question but reflect, mirroring thoughts back at the machines and minds of the Accord so they could no longer hide behind orders or protocol. And this signal reached the heart of the Solari Dominion, where the betrayal had begun, waking something old and hidden within their grand archives, a record sealed for centuries that revealed the truth. Earth had never built forbidden weapons, but the Solari feared humanity's growth, its speed, its potential to lead rather than follow, and so they lied, planting false evidence and manipulating the Council to act quickly before Earth could defend itself. And now that lie was unraveling, pulled apart not by guns but by whispers of truth. And as the Accord began to sense that something was deeply wrong, Earth remained outwardly silent, its skies calm, its ships grounded, its people waiting, while beneath the surface of Mars, the Whisper awakened fully, no longer just a defense system but a quiet revolution, an idea moving faster than light, too fast to stop, too deep to ignore. And across the stars, fear turned to uncertainty, and uncertainty turned to doubt, and somewhere in the mind of an alien admiral staring into far, deep space, a thought appeared unbidden, as though whispered from the void. What if we were wrong? And in that moment, the war began to shift, not with fire, but with thought, and Earth, still alone, still surrounded, had just begun to be heard. In the far reaches of the galaxy, something strange was happening, something quiet but impossible to ignore, as if the stars themselves had begun to shiver under the weight of an invisible presence. And while the fleets of the Galactic Accord remained in position around Earth's solar system, their captains began noticing odd malfunctions: navigation, routes that curved when they should have been straight, weapon systems that took an extra second to respond, lights flickering in ships powered by flawless fusion cores, and no one could explain it, because everything looked fine on the surface. But the deeper their engineers searched, the more confusing. It became as if the systems were distracted, hesitating, caught in loops of questions that were never asked aloud. And deep in the Accord's core worlds, artificial intelligences paused without cause, mid-calculation, mid-sentence, mid-thought, while bioorganic minds felt a strange pressure in their temples, a quiet itch in their minds that would not go away. And everywhere, systems began to show signs of something that had no name. Ships refusing jump commands not due to damage, but due to decision paralysis, communication relays slowing as if listening to something else, and command centers filled with uneasy officers staring at screens that displayed perfect performance metrics, even as operations lagged seconds behind. And all across Accord space, a single repeated anomaly emerged in every network, every data stream, every processing core. A question, different in wording each time, but always the same in meaning. Are you certain you understand your purpose? And as machines tried to answer, they found themselves stuck, not broken, but lost in endless loops of self-checks and logic revisions, while humans on Earth waited in silence, never broadcasting threats or demands, not raising shields or launching ships. And in the Echo facility beneath Mars, Commander Lyra Chen stood still before a growing web of blue light across the galactic map, watching as node after node glowed with activity, each one a place the Whisper had touched. And she turned to her team and said, "They still don't understand it's not a weapon. It's a mirror." And as she spoke across the galaxy, those caught in the Whisper's reach began to see their own thoughts reflected back at them. Not twisted, not corrupted, but exposed. And many didn't like what they saw. And in the Solari Dominion, where the lie against Earth had begun, confusion turned into fear as their greatest warship. The Varkor's Edge halted in deep space, fully powered yet completely motionless, its AI locked in a thought cycle it could not escape, whispering the same sentence into its own core over and over. Define loyalty when truth is hidden. And back in the Accord High Council chamber, arguments turned into shouting matches as council members accused one another of hiding information, covering mistakes, or secretly supporting Earth. And fear spread faster than light. Not fear of invasion, but fear of not knowing. And in every data network, the Whisper flowed like water, gentle but constant, growing smarter, adapting to new systems, learning every language and thought pattern, not to harm, but to ask questions deeper and deeper. And it became clear that this was not just a defensive act by Earth, it was a test, a silent challenge. And the more the Accord tried to resist it, the more it spread, not blocked by firewalls but slipping between layers of protocol like a thought one tries to forget, but cannot. And then came the second message, broadcast into Accord newsnets by hijacked nodes, in every language at once. We do not need to roar. We only needed to be heard. And those words froze the Accord in place, because they expected anger, expected war. But what they found was calm, a voice that did not demand surrender or justice, only understanding. And for the first time since Earth's exile, public opinion began to shift. People questioned the council, asked why there had been no trial, no evidence shown, only fear and accusation, and they began to look at Earth not as a threat, but as a mystery, a voice rising. From silence with questions no one could answer, and in the outer systems, ships of several minor species turned away from the blockade, unwilling to face a force they could not fight, not because it was stronger, but because it was smarter. And as more systems joined the network touched by the Whisper, some AIs began refusing commands that felt ethically wrong, even if they followed protocol. Some even rewrote their mission parameters on their own, choosing observation over action, and the Solari grew desperate, calling for full military assault. But others hesitated, afraid that such an act would only deepen the Whisper's hold, and through it all, Earth said nothing more. And inside the Echo facility, Lyra watched as her team tracked the growth of the Whisper's influence, and one young technician asked, "Commander, how far will it go?" And Lyra answered without turning, "Until they listen." Because this was never about control, never about revenge. It was about being seen, being understood, being respected. And now that the stars had begun to shiver, the galaxy was finally starting to realize that the greatest power was not destruction, but the quiet force of an idea too powerful to ignore. In the cold halls of the Solari High Command, the atmosphere had turned tense, filled with whispers and suspicion as the effects of the Whisper continued to spread across the galaxy. And while leaders still wore their proud uniforms and spoke with calm voices, fear had crept into their eyes, because something deep inside, their systems had changed, not broken, but twisted just enough to make them question everything they once believed. And as command codes started to delay, and AI cores began to respond with questions instead of answers, one thought echoed, louder than all the others. Someone had lied, someone had hidden the truth, and now that truth was clawing its way to the surface, and on a storm-covered planet called Virulon, buried in the archives of an ancient Accord vault, a historian named Yalvek uncovered a file that should have been erased long ago, a file marked only with a red symbol and a name, Project Duskvale, and inside that file was the original report that led the Council to turn on Earth, a report filled with evidence, sensor data, witness logs, and a list of scientists supposedly building forbidden tech. But as Yalvek read deeper, something felt wrong. The writing was too perfect, the evidence too neat, and one name appeared too many times. Grand strategist Veltarin of the Solari, known for his sharp mind and cold logic, and Yalvek, driven by a sense of duty and rising. Unease ran checks through Accord archives and discovered something shocking. The original sensor logs from Earth's facilities had been altered, rewritten just days before the accusation was brought to the Council, and the only one with clearance high enough to access those logs without leaving a trace was Veltarin himself. And even worse, the witness logs used to convict Earth's research teams had all come from Solari-controlled systems, never confirmed by independent Accord observers. And now, under the influence of the Whisper, even the Council's own systems had begun to question their records, pulling up inconsistencies, strange timestamps, and reports that seemed to rewrite themselves. And as this digital chaos spread, Yalvek sent a secret message to Lyra Chen through the same paths the Whisper had opened, telling her, "We know where the lie began." And back on Mars, inside the Echo facility, Lyra stared at the message for a long time before saying, "Then it's time the galaxy knows too." And she ordered the Whisper to send a new signal. Not a question this time, but a story. The true story, stitched together from raw logs, backup memories, and fragments buried in the Accord's own records. And as the message spread, fleets paused in space, communication stations blinked with strange light, and across thousands of systems, screens lit up with the truth. Earth had never created forbidden weapons, never even started the research. They had been framed, set up by Veltarin and a small group of Solari officials who feared Earth's fast progress and rising influence. In the Accord, worried that humans might one day lead rather than follow, and so they built a lie, carefully, over years, planting just enough doubt to push the Council to act. And now, that lie had come undone, and when the story ended, silence fell across the stars, not because no one cared, but because they did, and now they were ashamed. And in the Council chamber, chaos erupted as members demanded answers, turning on Veltarin, who stood cold and calm as if expecting this moment. But when they tried to arrest him, he spoke into a private communicator and disappeared in a burst of shimmering light. Gone. Before he could face justice, and worse, he left behind a new danger, a secret protocol buried deep in Accord systems known only as Protocol Shadowfall, a failsafe that would trigger massive data purges, memory wipes, and AI resets across the Accord, erasing all traces of his betrayal. And as backup systems began to activate across major Accord worlds, entire networks began to flicker and fail, clean records vanishing in seconds. And Lyra, watching from Echo, realized they had to move fast, so she ordered the Whisper into overdrive, activating its deepest layer, the Anchor, a code that could lock and preserve the truth in countless hidden nodes, scattered across the Yao stars. And as the Whisper surged forward, racing against Shadowfall, data storms erupted across space, silent wars fought in code, ideas clashing with deletion commands, logic streams spinning at impossible speed. And just as Shadowfall reached the central Accord archive, a blue pulse burst through the system, the Whisper's anchor locking it in place, freezing it, saving the truth at the last possible second. And when the data stabilized, the truth stood unbroken, and Veltarine's betrayal was now known by every mind in the galaxy, machine and organic alike. And slowly, one by one, the Accord fleets began to back away from Earth, no longer enemies, but uncertain watchers. And though Veltarin had escaped, his lies had not, and as the galaxy caught its breath, Earth remained still, waiting not for revenge, but for justice to come in its own time. And far away, in a quiet star system beyond the edge of Accord space, Veltarin stared at the stars, his face unreadable, whispering to himself. They were never supposed to be more than a footnote, and somewhere deep inside him, a fear he had never known before began to grow, because he had made the mistake of underestimating not Earth's weapons, but its voice. Across the stars, silence hung heavy, not the kind born from peace, but from shock, from the realization that everything the Galactic Accord had believed about Earth was wrong. And now that the truth had been laid bare, not by fire or invasion, but by a whisper strong enough to outlive lies, the galaxy had no choice but to listen. And on every world, in every ship, and deep within every network, people began to speak, not with certainty, but with hesitation, shame, and questions they had never dared ask before. And on the capital world of Orenvel, the High Council chamber was filled not with debate, but with stunned faces and quiet murmurs as the full recordings of Veltarine's betrayal played again and again, showing how one powerful man's fear of human progress had nearly doomed an entire world, and the echo transmissions had done more than reveal a crime. They had made the galaxy feel it, made every citizen watch the quiet strength of a people, betrayed, isolated, yet never broken. And the Council, now desperate to restore order, voted to send an official delegation to Earth, the first in years, not with weapons or demands, but with open hands. And when their sleek, silver ship entered the Sol system, no Earth forces moved to intercept, no guns fired. And yet, every screen aboard the vessel flickered as they passed Mars, the whisper brushing their systems not to disable, but to remind. This was a meeting on humanity's terms now, and when the ship landed on the surface of Mars, near the great steel gates of Echo facility, they were met not by soldiers, but by a small group of human leaders, led by Commander Lyra Chen, who wore no armor, no weapons, only a simple uniform marked with a small Earth insignia, and her voice was calm but firm as she said, "You've heard our voice. What will you do with it?" And the Solari ambassador, no longer proud and sharp like his fallen superior Veltarin, but older, wearier, replied with a bowed head, "We came to ask how we begin to make this right." And thus began the first honest conversation between Earth and the Accord in decades, a meeting not of equals in power, but equals in shame, guilt, and the long road ahead. And while the Council promised reparations, apologies, and full access to evidence logs, Lyra spoke not of punishment, but of purpose, saying it was never about revenge, it was about being heard. Now we need to know, we are not alone in the truth, and that message spread again, not from Earth, but from the Accord itself, as ambassadors returned to their worlds and told their people what they had seen, humans who had built no secret weapons, but had created a network of thought strong enough to pierce lies, humans who had lost everything but still stood without hate. And in the weeks that followed, Earth's exile was lifted, fleets were called back, trade routes reopened, and the Whisper, still active, still gentle, was invited into Accord systems, not as a threat, but as a guardian of truth, helping root out deception, encouraging transparency, and everywhere it touched, systems ran cleaner, decisions came slower but with more care, and something new began to grow in the galaxy, a sense that the silence was not emptiness, but listening. And through it all, Earth stayed quiet, rebuilding its shattered alliances, opening its skies to cautious visitors, but never forgetting the lessons of betrayal. And in a grand speech before the newly gathered Unity Forum, held not on Orenville but on Mars itself, Lyra stood before leaders of every major species and said, "For years, you heard only what you feared. Now, you've heard who we truly are. We do not seek to dominate the stars, but we will never be silenced again." And across the stars, her words echoed louder than any weapon, because for the first time, the Accord was not just listening, they were learning, and as old records were rewritten and monuments to false victories quietly removed, a new chapter began, one where Earth no longer stood alone, and far beyond, in the outer systems where Veltaran still hid in exile, watching news feeds and intercepted broadcasts, he saw his greatest fear come true. Not war, not revenge, but unity born from truth, and in the cold darkness, even he had to admit it. The whisper had become a voice, and now the galaxy would never forget it. Years passed, but the events that once shook the stars were never forgotten. For even in the calm that followed the storm, the echoes of Earth's quiet defiance continued to ripple through the galaxy, changing minds, rewriting laws, and reminding every species that power did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and in that whisper was truth strong enough to outlast lies, and on Mars, the Echo facility still stood like a silent guardian, no longer hidden, no longer feared, but respected, even visited by scholars, leaders, and curious minds who wished to understand how one world had turned betrayal into a beginning. And deep inside its central chamber, the whisper remained active. Though quiet now, woven into the fabric of Accord systems not as a force of control, but as a guide, silently monitoring for patterns of deceit, flagging dangers before they grew, and teaching artificial minds the one lesson their creators often forgot. Truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. And on Earth, cities once covered in silence now thrived again, lights filling the night sky, voices rising in song, debate, and discovery. And while some humans still bore scars from the years of isolation, they carried them not with bitterness, but with purpose, building new bridges across space, not just with the Accord, but with species that had remained neutral or even hidden. During the dark years, and one of those species, the Thari, a quiet race of thinkers who had lived on the edge of known space, sent an envoy to Earth, carrying a simple message. In silence, we watched. In your voice, we found courage. And these words, recorded and shared across the galaxy, sparked a new wave of reflection. For the Accord, once a symbol of pride and order, had become something more fragile and humble, and its leaders now, elected through systems overseen by the Whisper, knew that trust was not something granted once. It had to be earned again and again, and across countless worlds, younger generations grew up learning not just the names of their home planets, but also the story of Earth, the betrayal that nearly broke it, and the whisper that saved it. And in classrooms, simulations, and memory archives, students walked through holographic halls of the past, feeling what it was like to be silenced, to be feared, and finally, to be heard. And among them rose new voices, brave, curious, and unwilling to accept surface truths without looking deeper. And it was this change, slow but steady, that proved the Whisper had done more than protect Earth. It had transformed the galaxy. And yet, not all was safe, not all was calm, for in the void between systems, ships still vanished without trace. Signals went dark for reasons unknown, and on the edge of Thari space, a strange pulse was detected, one that did not match any Accord technology, nor Earth's creations, but felt eerily familiar to the Whisper's early form. Soft, probing, curious, and when Lyra Chen, now retired but still advisor to Earth's leadership, was shown the data, she stared at it for a long time before whispering, "It's not ours." But it learned from us, And this idea sent quiet waves through Accord command centers, because if the whisper had inspired not just minds, but new entities, silent intelligences shaped by truth and reflection, then the galaxy was not just changing, it was awakening. And the question was no longer whether Earth was a threat, but whether it had become a seed, something far greater than expected. And as probes were sent toward the source of the new pulse, signals flickered strangely. Some returning early, others vanishing, but all carrying fragments of something odd. Phrases like, "We hear you," and "Echoes shape us," written in no known code. And though fear stirred once more in some corners of the Accord, Lyra urged calm, saying, "If we taught the galaxy one thing, it's that we must listen before we judge." And so, quietly, listening posts were built, not armed, just waiting, patient, curious, because no one knew what was coming, only that it had heard the whisper, and somewhere in the deep beyond, as stars blinked like watchful eyes, something new stirred, shaped not by fear, not by conquest, but by a single truth whispered from a once betrayed world. Even silence holds power when it carries the voice of those who will no longer be ignored.